Okay then. So, first things first is to, let's load up the main normal sort of image, or the day for night image. So what I've done in here, in source images, is I've got this just here. Let's load it up. So there we are, that's our completed day for night image. It's just a still image and it wasn't taken by me. So, but if we want to do a 3D matte painting, we need to extract a camera. We need to figure out what the camera position was and where it was pointing and what lens it was using when it initially took the daytime version of this shot. Now in Maya, what you can do is let's just go here, and I made a black and white version that wasn't the nighttime version, so it was a bit easier to see. I called it base, just here, JPEG. So let's load that into the viewport. So we're in downloads, there's our project, it's in source images, and there it is. So we can see our sort of painting in the Maya viewport. Now how do we get the camera then? Well, you could do it this way, and indeed this is how some people have tried to do it in the past. You know that these buildings are essentially kind of boxes. So, and you know actually if you look at this one, you could kind of go, you know what, this octagonal kind of shape, and there must be a bounding box that fits around here that would be a cube, if that's a true octagon, and I'm going to assume that it is. So you could create a cube or a box, and then you could rotate it around, and you could start moving your camera around until it lined up like this. But you'd have to do more than move the camera around and position it. You'd also have to go into the camera settings, and you'd have to play around with the focal length as well, because the chances are that the focal length used to take this photo is not the default focal length of 35. In fact, to me, this kind of looks like quite a telephoto kind of shot, because the perspective is quite flattened. You know, when you extract the perspective lines from this, they're probably going to be quite parallel. So if you were to try and do this manually, you've got to create like a guide object, then you've got to start moving this around, and then you've got to start moving this around like that, and it's agony, absolute agony. I've had to do it myself a few times, not in Maya, but in an old program called Softimage that had a similar lack of functionality, where if you wanted to match a camera to a still image, you had to do it this way. You had to make like educated guesses. You had to think, yeah, that's a telephoto kind of lens, so I'll make the focal length maybe 100 millimeters, because that's quite a kind of zoomed in telephoto look, and then lots and lots of tweaking. Don't do it that way, because thankfully 3D Studio Max has a much better automated or semi-automated way of doing it. Not just 3D Studio Max. I mentioned on the Facebook page some time ago, and I think I mentioned it last week to a couple of people, there is a free program called FSpy, if I could spell it right. This is just a small exe program, so you don't even have to download it, don't even have to install it, you just run it. It's an executable. And it does the identical thing that I'm going to show you that 3D Studio Max can do. So if you don't want to install 3D Studio Max, you can download FSpy. Although I haven't tested it yet in bringing it back into Maya, so that could be difficult, who knows. But I know that it works in 3D Studio Max. So what I want everyone to do is make sure you got 3D Studio Max on display. If it doesn't look like this, it probably looks like that. And if it looks like this, then you'll notice that you've got a little arrow just here, and you can choose the layout. So I would choose the full screen layout if I were you. And if it looks like this when you go to full screen, in Max you have to go up to top, and you have to click perspective, and it looks like this. And Max has a slightly different way of moving around the viewport. If you hold down Alt and middle mouse button, it lets you tumble around like this. If you hold down Control and middle mouse button, it sort of pans. And if you hold down Shift it kind of moves from side to side. And I constantly get, it's like trying to speak two languages at once when you're trying to do this, or two languages that are quite similar but different, like being able to speak Spanish and Portuguese at the same time. But anyway, you essentially want to get to a point where you're looking at a viewport like this. Is everyone okay? Has everyone got to that point?
It's not opening that at all.
It's not opening at all. Neither are yours. Anyone else got it open?
There's a thing you have to find. It doesn't come up as a window.
Oh yeah, it might have a little hidden thing going, hey, this is your first time. There you go, yeah, there you go. So you've got to go through that rigmarole of saying, I want to use standard and just go okay. Yeah, it often gets hidden on your other screen, behind Maya or something like that. Right. I'll go real slowly, guys, so you can catch up to this. So this is what you're looking at in Max at the moment. So what you can do in Max is you can just literally drag and drop an image into the Max viewport. So you've downloaded this and you've unzipped it. And when you unzip it, well, I just unzipped it into the downloads. I couldn't be bothered putting it anywhere proper. Go into your source images, and that's where all the textures and stuff are. And you just want this one here, Day for Night 2 base. And there's two here. There's a JPEG and a PNG. Don't think it matters which one, but I'm just using the JPEG because it's a slightly smaller file. If you drag and drop that straight into the viewport, Max is going to come up with that, saying, how do you want to use this? And you're going to say, I want it as a viewport background. I don't want it as an environment map because I'm not going to be rendering or doing anything like that in Max. So I'm going to untick environment map and just leave use as viewport background and click OK. And it's going to bring it in and it's going to look like that. So it's going to look wrong to begin with. Everyone got to that point? I'll wait a little bit. I can see some people have. He's still downloading it. Is it taking a while? Yeah. Yeah. It's almost there. Okay, I'll talk through this, but then I'll just do it again. So it looks like this at the moment, but you have to go into, because it's the wrong aspect ratio, it's kind of filling this screen. So in Max, you've got to go to Views, and you've got to go to Viewport Configuration. And you get this bunch of options, and you want background. So it's fairly self-explanatory. And what you want is down here, where it says aspect ratio. At the moment, it's matching the rendering output. You want to change that, and you want to match the bitmap itself. So then if you go OK, it pops into the right kind of aspect ratio. So I'll just go over that again. Once you've downloaded that zip and unzipped it, you want to go into the folder, go into Source Images, and then you want to drag and drop that Day for Night 2 base into the 3ds Max background. And then once you've done that, you want to go to Views, Viewport Configuration, Background, and Match Bitmap. Click OK. I'll pause in a moment, by the way, and just let you get up to speed with this, and then we'll do the next step. All right, here's the magic part in 3D Studio Max. On the right-hand side, this is your modifier and creation kind of panel in Max. You want to go all the way to the right with a little spanner. Click that. You've got a bunch of different utilities here, and you could probably guess that it's this one we want here, Perspective Match. So you click that, and here are your Perspective Match controls. At the moment, the vanishing lines are hidden, so to show them, you click Show Vanishing Lines. And that happens all of a sudden. So what you got now are two sets of each one of the axes. So in Max deals with Z going up. Maya deals with Y going up. Max decides to be its own special case and makes Z up by default. So you've got two sets for going up for Z, 2 sets for Y, and 2 sets for X. Now, this is I think the awesome bit with this. All you have to do, it's a bit like that perspective script in Photoshop. You have to identify parallel lines that are going to be on this axis. Let's do X first. So you choose one of these little handles and you move it, and as you move this you can actually see that grid changing. You want to put the end of it at one end of a parallel line and the other end just here. And then with this one, and if you click the whole line you can move it all at one time, you want to select another set of parallel lines to this. So again, a bit like that perspective script, the wider apart these lines are and the more accurately you place them, the better the camera match you're going to get. So let's move this up to there and this up to here. So we've defined now where the X is, and I look down here at my little axes in Max to sort of help guide me about where these lines should go so they make logical sense. Let's do the Y now. So I'm going to move it up here and I'm going to shift it here. I'm going to try and be as accurate as I can be. Yeah, that'll do. And then I'll do the same with this one. I'm going to go up here again. Because I'm going to assume, I think it's fairly safe to assume that these buildings were built in a grid pattern because it looks like a North American city, and they're going to be at right angles to each other. You can already see now that grid is looking much more aligned with the image underneath, or you'll never be able to see it on the, oh yeah, you can sort of see it on the projector, but you'll be able to see it on your one. Now let's do the verticals. It can be a bit trickier here, so I'm going to use this building. I'm going to look up. I've accidentally moved the wrong one. I'm going to move this to there, and then I'm going to use this one. I'm going to come, let's go to here. And as you move this, you'll notice now that home grid looks really well aligned with the buildings. So what Max has done is that it's by you defining what is parallel to each other, it can do some cool trigonometry and reverse engineer where the camera must have been and what the focal length must have been. Now, it's not going to be perfect. Actually, anyone got an idea why it wouldn't be perfect? Even if you were pixel perfect, placing your little lines, why would the actual camera solution not be exactly perfect? Any guesses?
The lens and stuff, yeah.
That's it. Give him a prize. Yeah. So, in reality, obviously, shot with a lens, there's going to be distortions around the edges. And so it can't be absolutely perfect. Programs like, I reckon that F-Spy program might be able to compensate for that. There's a program, 3D program called Modo that lets you do this as well. And Modo goes one step further and has a lens correction feature in this as well. But it's going to be close enough for us. I have a feeling this photo was cropped anyway into the image, so the distortion is going to be minimal. And anyway, it's shot, as I said, with a sort of telephoto kind of lens, which again is going to lessen the apparent distortion. So once you've got that, it's figured out the camera. So you can hide the vanishing lines now if you want, or you can bring them back. It doesn't really matter. You've got to do 2 more things. This is we've done this on the perspective view. We want to create a camera now based on what we've just done. So the way we can do that is go to Create, Cameras, Create Standard Camera from View. Click this. It's created a camera for us. Now we can look, we can export this camera now into Maya. If we select the camera, we can go to the modifier stack just here, and this tells us a bit about the camera. And we want a free camera. If by any chance it has created a camera that's called a target camera, you want to turn it back into a free camera. Now I'm going to pause there. Okay. Right, we've got the camera now from Max. Now we need to get the camera out of 3D Studio Max and into Maya and start modeling these buildings. Make sure you've got your camera selected in Max. And the next thing you want to do is go to File, Export, export selected, and put it somewhere logical. So I'm going to put mine, I'm going to put it in the same folder that that Maya project was. So in downloads, I'm going to put it in assets. I'm going to class this camera as an asset. And you want to make sure that you're saving out as an Autodesk .fbx file. So let's call this projection camera. And when you hit save, you're going to have a massive bunch of options to choose from. And I'm going to have to actually refer to my notes because you have to get this right. Let's have a look. So geometry, you can forget about geometry. You don't need to worry about that. Animation. I'm going to put bake animation on. In the past, I've had it screw up, and if it kind of assumes there's animation on the camera, it kind of sort of bakes in that position and that orientation. Well, it hasn't broken by putting baked animation on, but it has broken when I haven't had it on before. So put that on. Then you should be able to skip things like deformations, curve filters, etc. But obviously you do want cameras, and you want to make sure that's definitely clicked on, and it should be on by default, but obviously make sure that it's on. Now you want to go to advanced options, and you've got units, axis conversion, UI, and FBX. So let's go to units, and let me just check my notes. I think automatic scale factor should be fine. Axis conversion, put Z up. So it doesn't actually convert anything, it just assumes that that's how it is coming out of Max. Again, when you're dealing with FBX, I'd be amazed if this works first go, because when you're dealing with the dreaded Fbx file format, and you're doing it on a new computer, it's luck of the draw whether it's going to work. UI, shouldn't have to worry about that. Fbx File Format. So look at all the different versions of all these different versions of FBX, and some are going to be compatible with others and some aren't. The one that I have found worked for me, well, certainly back in my office and at home, is Fbx 2018. Now, hopefully, this will work. Now, it will more than likely come up with, it will complain about, it'll come up with an error, it will complain. Let's see if this does this. Yes, it did. But hopefully also, this shouldn't actually matter too much. It says one or more objects in the scene has local axes that are not perpendicular to each other, non-orthogonal, orthogonal, I don't know. The FBX plugin only supports blah 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 blah. This can create inaccurate appearance with the affected objects. Just go OK. Live with it. So we've exported this camera now out of Max, and now we're going to bring it in to Maya. So go into here, into Maya. Now I've loaded in, I've preloaded in exactly the same image into Maya. And now let's bring in that camera. So let's go to File, Import. My import dialog box has gone over here, and let's go into, let's find our project, which I put in downloads, camera projection basic, and I put it in assets. And there it is, projection camera.fbx. So click that and go import. Don't worry about that, he says, because we're not actually going to be doing any animation yet. It's just a still camera. At the moment, we're still looking through the perspective, the default perspective camera. So what happens if we now look through, but we can see that camera's come in just here. So if we look through that camera, let's go to Panels and go to camera 001 and cross our fingers. Looks like that, which is interesting. Let's see if I can zoom this out. Oh, I know why it looks like that. Because this is an image plane that was initially created for the perspective viewport. Let's delete it and instead create a new image plane. And that was in, again, back into downloads, camera projection, source images, and we'll use that base JPEG. There we go, that's better. At the moment, our grid's disappeared because the camera scale is quite different in Max than it is in Maya. Now, you can fiddle around at your leisure. When you exported it from Max, there was like a scale conversion. So maybe experiment with exporting not as inches, but as maybe centimeters or meters to see if you can get a more sensible kind of grid layout. It shouldn't matter for what we're doing because we're not doing anything with like we're not building anything to scale where it really matters. As long as everything is proportionately in scale with each other, that's all that matters. Let's create another new cube like this, and you're not going to see the cube because it's behind the image plane. So if you select the image plane, now you can either select the image plane in the viewport, or you can select your camera, and there'll also be an image plane tab just here. If you scroll down, there's this thing called depth. If you put a much higher number in here, let's try 1000. Yeah, now you can see our grid, and you can see that this camera is quite big and it's quite far away. But then again, that kind of makes sense in a way because we are looking, you know, we're dealing with a city here. So let's choose that cube and let's scale this cube up. Now, this is also a very important thing. A good thing to do straight away once you've brought this camera in is to bookmark the camera's position, because if you accidentally move this camera, you're going to screw everything up. So bookmark it just by clicking that little bookmark icon. I'm going to switch back to wireframe viewport, and I'm going to scale this up, and I'm going to move it. I'm not going to move it up and down to begin with. I'm only going to move it left and right. I'm going to align it with this building, and you can see it's a pretty good match. Let's go to right mouse button when we're on one of these edges and select face, and select that back face, kind of shift it forwards a bit, select this face, move this out, and you can see that's pretty good. It's pretty close. And then if we select our bottom face, which can be a bit of a pain to select in the viewport, and draw this down, there we are. We've got a building, we've got a cube that matches the proportions of the building in relation to the camera. This is called image-based modeling, and we're going to do more of it, as I said, in a couple of weeks' time, or maybe next week. I've got to check to see when I planned to do that. Before I go any further with this, let's just have a look quickly at this camera that came in from 3D Studio Max. Looks all right, seems to behave all right, but let's look at the channel box. Got some crazy values going on in here. Because of the way that it transfers the camera from Max over to Maya, it can get some pretty funky kind of values, especially in scale. So what I personally like to do, and I would encourage you to do, is to create a new camera in Maya. So create camera, just a normal camera, just this. And then and call this camera, I like to call it all in caps, projection or proj camera. And then if you select the camera and then you hold down Control and you click the camera that came in from Max, the one called 001, you can go to Modify, Match Transformations. But you don't want to match the scale, you only want to match the translation and then the rotation. So now if we look through the projection camera, should be pretty much the same view. Oh, I've got caps lock on. We might need to, oh, no, it's not yet, is it? No. Because now we've got to match not only the position, we've got to match the field of view and things like that. So the way you can do this is, this is my Max camera. I'm going to look at the camera shape on the attribute editor. And this is the numbers I'm going to look at. First of all, I'm going to look at the focal length. So the focal length on that Max camera was 69.525. So I'm going to go to my projection camera and make it the same, 69.525. instantly zoom in. It's a bit better. Let's go back up to the max camera. Now this is important, and this you'll get more and more used to this as your VFX careers continue. Is we've got to match the film gate and the aspect ratio. So where is it? Let's look at the camera aperture, and these are the dimensions of the camera that came in from Max. So it was 1.417 by 1.063. Let's see what they are from the default Maya camera. Well, almost the same. It was that one was okay. What was that? That was 1.063. So let's change this here. 1.063. So now everything about this camera we created in Maya is the same as the Max camera, except it doesn't have those nasty scale values. Our Maya camera is all nice 111. It's just as you get more experience, if you start scaling 3D cameras, you can run into lots and lots of problems. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording again, just so you can get up to speed with that aspect of it. Okay, so just to recap then what I've done, and also you've seen how touchy 3ds Max and Maya can be, considering they're made by the same company, how they don't communicate with each other particularly predictably. But to recap, I brought in the image into 3D Studio Max. Then I went to the little spanner icon, went to perspective match, clicked show vanishing lines. Now when you watch this video tomorrow or whenever, I'm going to try and get it up online tomorrow, and you follow along again, if it hasn't worked for you today, try putting your lines exactly where I've put mine, just so that we can hopefully eliminate any gremlins in the works, and that you'll get the same end result that I get. So we did that. Then we created a camera from that view, and it was create a standard camera from view, and we made sure that that camera, if we go to modify in Max, is a free camera. See, I'm getting a different lens to people over there. Some people we're getting 90mm lenses. Again, this is just this is the annoyance of these programs not being consistent in the way they communicate with each other. Right, so we did that, create a camera. Then we bring it into, with the correct Fbx settings, and again, just rewatch the video to see those settings. I brought that camera into Maya, and then what I actually then did was created a new camera, a new, just normal first camera here, the first option, and I matched its translation and its rotation to the Max camera. And then I matched some of its attributes to the Max camera, and I matched its focal length, and I matched its camera aperture settings as well. And then on the image plane that I brought in, I did have to change the depth to 1000. So again, when you watch this video, and if you can follow along, and you can pause the video obviously, hopefully if you do exactly what I'm doing, you'll get the same result. So we got to that point. Oh yeah, and then I created a cube, and I roughly moved it into position and moved some of the faces, and we can see there's a pretty good match. Now you can see this is a good, like Ben noticed, that it can't be perfect because it doesn't take into account lens distortion, and lens distortion happens more towards the peripheral edges of a frame than in the middle. So you can see as the vertical moves further down, the building becomes more and more misaligned with the box. And ideally, when you're doing these skyscrapers, you don't want to be doing anything like selecting vertices and sort of pulling them out to fit the projection. What you want to do is you want to hopefully assume that all these skyscrapers are essentially a series of boxes, and so if you're going to move anything, it should really only be whole faces at a time, like this. this is what we're doing here. So we're building image-based modeling. So we're doing very, very simple image-based modeling. Now it's a case of blocking in the rest of the buildings. And you're going to have to start sort of making some assumptions, because unless you were there when you took the photo, you don't know the distances between these buildings. So you're going to have to maybe assume that this building in the foreground is lying on the same plane as this midground building and that building. Now, it probably isn't, not exactly, but we're going to have to make some of these assumptions. So what you would do is you would maybe duplicate this building, bring it over here, and maybe shift it off like this, and then go back into your sort of face mode. Actually, you might want to go to 4 views here, so that we can, and let's make sure we are looking through projection camera, and then let's look through the normal perspective camera here. This way we can actually stand a better chance of selecting the faces that we want to, because we don't want to move this projection camera. So now I can move this inwards like this, and maybe outwards a bit so it matches there. Maybe push that in a little bit. You want to be doing, this is the kind of modeling you want to be doing. Actually, you want to potentially well, no, let's leave that where it is, and then you could stack another one on top to create this bit. Actually, it's probably going to move around. Let's try this. So if we duplicate this, move it a bit forwards like that, and you can see that kind of makes sense. It's butting right onto the end here, and that looks like it does there. Let's go to face and shift this up a bit so we get that building. And you go around the scene doing this essentially. Now, most of these buildings are going to be fairly straightforward because they're skyscrapers and they're just boxes. They get a little bit more complicated here, where you're going to have to stack some boxes around each other. But again, you can kind of work on the assumption that this building is parallel and on the same kind of plane as this building. So you could duplicate this, shift it here, and let's make sure we got the right one. Sort of do something like that maybe. Should make life easier by just going into perspective viewport. Let's go here, sort of shrink that in like that, move that in and this in, and then you'd duplicate this again and build that little sort of one on the side. It's not too difficult because you're only really moving faces around, and there's this kind of almost magic kind of feeling that these buildings are beginning to almost position themselves. If we can work on that assumption that we're in a skyscraper setup where it's all in a grid. Now when you come to do this one, you still want to build it with blocks. You just want to begin to angle these blocks. So look at an octagon and figure out the degrees of an angle that an octagon's sides would be, and rotate one of the blocks around to form these kind of sides. And you want to also probably suggest that it's got some depth kind of going into it, because again, when you project into that, you're going to get more of a sense of 3D. And you keep on going around. With this spire kind of top, by the way, obviously you'll have access to the completed project that I made, so you can load up my scene and you can have a look to see the amount of detail I went into it. The more detail you put in, the more layers, the more sense of 3D your eventual 3D matte painting is going to have. When you get to the far background, like these buildings say, and maybe these buildings here, you can treat them just as planes. You can just create a plane instead, scale that up and turn it at sort of 90 degrees, push that into the far background like this, like that, because then that eventual far background layer is so far away it effectively becomes flat. And maybe the same for this. But if you did put the time in and actually modeled this, then you just get a better sense of 3D in the final end product. Anyway, that's the 3D part of it for now. Let's jump over to what you've got to do in 2D. Right, so this is our map painting, the finished map painting, the finished day for night map painting. You've essentially got to create an image map for each one of these buildings. But you've got to do it as normally you go from back to front. In this case, you're going to start to do it from front to back, because as you extract the foreground buildings, it's going to leave a gap in the background buildings that you're going to have to fit in. You're going to have to fill in the missing information. But I'll show you what I mean. So the first things first, let's deal with this extreme foreground building. I've got a collapsed layer, a merged layer of the entire map painting here. So you can go to the polygonal lasso tool and you can trace around this building here like this. I know that this is a 2000 by 1000 pixel image, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new document that is 2000 by 1000, and I'm going to give it a grey, just because I like a neutral grey. So this is where we're going to paste our different elements into. Actually, you know what, this is not going to be grey, this has got to be black, because otherwise the alpha won't work properly. So I've traced out my extreme foreground element. I can do Control C to copy it. I'm going to paste it into here, but I'm not going to just do normal Control V. I'm going to do a paste special, paste in place. That will position the building in exactly the same position as it was in the initial kind of painting. Now what I need to do is to create a alpha channel for this image. Well, that's thankfully straightforward. Just Control click this layer, go to channels and hit the new channel button, and this will create an alpha channel for this. So that's one image, and then you save it out. Let's save it out as a targa. And I'm going to call this, see I've got front buildings here, I'm going to call this front buildings 3 and 32 bits. Now in Maya, what I can do now is I can project that texture map onto these buildings. I'm actually going to choose these two and I'm going to actually combine them. So I'm just dealing with one object here. Makes it a bit easier. Okay, now there's a very specific shader setup that you have to do in Maya to get this to work. As I mentioned in the lecture, in a production sense, you would probably use something like Nuke or something more suited for matte paintings like Clarice. But you can still do it in Maya, and I would encourage you to give it a go in Maya. Look at, if you speak to any of the second years, Nick and Ethan both got quite into this, and they did very good first year projects with this. So if you see them, maybe ask them for some help or some advice, because yeah, they had some success with this. So we're going to project this from this projection camera on to this. So how do we do that? Right, we have to create a new shader. I'm just going to bring this up again to remind myself. So with this object selected, let's call this actually front buildings. Makes a bit more sense, doesn't it? I'm going to create a new shader. So right mouse button, assign new material. And the one we want, even though it pains me to say it, is we want the Arnold standard surface. And we're going to put the shader, we're going to put that image map not in the color. We can bring that down to nothing. We don't need any specularity either. We can bring that down to nothing. We're actually going to put it into the emission, so it's literally going to glow with this texture map, and we want to put it into color. So again, this pops up when you hit that, and we want to file. Now, this is another tricksy thing in Maya. Rather than just click this, we actually want a right mouse button on file, because you get hidden secret Easter egg options. Normally when you click file, it creates a texture, but we want to create it as a projection instead. And we get slightly different settings that come up when we do that. We've got projection type. So planar is like a normal kind of, it just projects it from one particular axis. A whole bunch of different options just here. We want the one right down the bottom, perspective. And when you click that, it means that you can unfurl this option here, the camera projection attributes. And you can see here, link to camera. And here's all the different cameras in our scene. So we're going to choose the projection camera. So we're essentially saying, project this image from this camera. And we have to change match camera film gate. Well, we don't have to change that one. We can keep that one the same. We want to set fit fill from fill to horizontal, like this. So what's happening now is it's projecting that image from the camera onto this building. Now, let's see if this works. Cross your fingers. So if I hit 5, let's look at it in shaded view. It's all black. But if I hit show me textures, and it didn't work. Hold on. Why didn't that work? Let's just check the materials and make sure that that's right. Oh, I think I know why. So, yeah, emission at the moment is set to nothing. Let's put that to 1. It's still not showing up, which is always a bit worrying. Okay, maybe. Nope. Oh, hello. Yeah, sure. Okay, why isn't that working? I'm not sure. Let's try. Okay, what about if I just look at that? Let's just do a render of that. Maybe it shows up in the render. Okay. Here we go. Isn't this typical? Okay. I'm just going to pause the recording just to see if I can fix this. Right, okay, yeah. Just for the sake of the viewers at home who wondered what went wrong there. I set up the projection, but I forgot to actually apply the image map itself. I won't make that mistake again, and I'll prove it with this one. So I'm going to assign a new material to this one, our kind of hero building. Same kind of process. Standard surface. Take down the diffuse, because we don't need that. Well, that was a specular. Take down that. What we want is emission, and we want that to 1. We want to click right mouse button click and set as projection. Change it from planar to perspective. Choose the camera. Set to horizontal. And then where you can see the actual image one here, click into that. Now choose our actual texture map. So I think I called this one first building. Yeah. And there we go, pops in. You can see the more accurate, actually what you can do now is, I can prove to you this is how the projection kind of works. Let's find the object in this viewport. See what happens? It's like a literally sort of shy, it projects through like that. So if you move this, it's going to be projecting. It's like the image stayed static, but and so the image kind of swims through the model. So anyway, that's how you set up the shader. Well, mostly you've got to do one more thing that is a little bit annoying, because when we come to do the top of this kind of tower, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create, the reason we're creating these alpha channels is that you're going to model this as a box. In fact, you can see it on my completed version. If it lets Maya comes back, not that version. Let's get rid of that. That's max. Too many windows open now. Here it is. Actually, I did try and model it that kind of way. Well, what you can do, because you've got an alpha channel, you can actually model this as a box and let the alpha channel cut out the more complicated shape. Because sometimes, I mean, most of these are just boxes, so they're fairly easy to model. But maybe that's a little bit more complicated. So you've got the option either of literally modeling that shape or modeling it like a box and letting the alpha channel cut through it. And what you have to do then is, I'll bring up the shader tree so you can see it. And again, when you watch the video recording, you can kind of pause it and have a look at this. Let's choose the first building. You can see where our texture went into the emission color, but you can also see how it also goes into the opacity as well, which means that the alpha channel in Photoshop, this thing will cut out the extra kind of details. This means, of course, then, I mean, you could cut out little strandy bits so you could sort of see through, say, columns and stuff like that. That would be too tricky to model or too time consuming in to do that in Maya. Better to just model simply and let the alpha channel cut it out. Right, that's almost it. You just have to keep on going. Oh no, I forgot. Very important. So say we've cut out this one. Well, now say we want to do this building just here. Let's literally chop this part of the building off. So I wouldn't recommend doing this. I would create a backup kind of copy of this layer before you do this. But let's cut that out so that disappears. You can see what's happened is that I've painted stuff behind the building. Let's do it actually, let's undo that and show you from scratch. So if I do copy merge to this, paste this onto here. Oh, I did it into the alpha channel. Let's get rid of that. So, for example, if I cut this out, and I create a new texture just with this element on. Now I've got to deal with, I'm pointing with my fingers like you can see this on the video recording. Now I've got to do this building behind. So if I just delete that, we get like, there's a bunch of blackness. So I need to create some more stuff where this building goes down, because as the camera, even though again it's difficult to see on this video, I mean you'll see it on the recording better than you do on the projector screen. You get parallax, you see some stuff appearing behind here. That obviously does not exist on the initial or the original matte painting. The same with seeing, sometimes you see in front and sometimes you see behind this octagonal building. This is the tricky time-consuming bit in Photoshop. It means I've got to create more stuff here. So how do you do that? There's a number of different ways. This is one way. You can draw a selection that sort of follows the perspective. Tap V. Now if you hold down Alt when you move something, you create a copy of it. You can just drag it down like this to extend the building a little bit. That's the easiest way to tackle that one. And then if you want to be really good and you want to get your matte painting looking really fancy, to get rid of that feeling of it being sort of a repeating pattern, you would sort of maybe start sort of sampling around here and sort of getting rid of some of the lights, so it doesn't look, whoops, it doesn't look quite as sort of a repeating pattern kind of thing going on. So you could do that. You're going to need to do it with this bit as well. It's going to be trickier on here, but again, you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just going to be just enough that as the camera moves forwards and we see in front and behind, we see little bits of this peeking out where initially it was hidden, that there is no blank space kind of going on. So again, I'm going to hold down Alt, drag this down like this. So I've extended that building a little bit. Then you can, and you're going to do, you'd also, if you say you wanted to do this building, obviously you're going to have to cut out the octagonal building first. I'm doing this obviously very, very roughly. Like that. Let's say that I've done this. Let's literally do it. So I'm going to copy that, Control C, New, 2000 by 100, 1000, sorry, and I'm going to paste in place. I'm going to make sure that the background is black. Control click the layer, go to channels, there's my alpha channel for that one, so I could save that out. Now if I go back into here, let's say, you know, I'm going to delete that, so there's nothing there anymore, so I've got to now create some stuff here for this building. So again, I might go something like this. Go to V, hold down Alt, and move this down. That. So it looks like the building, it's got some more stuff. But again, to stop the tiling and repeating kind of happening, you'll have to then further go in and maybe do some clone kind of brushing with a hard brush. Let's choose just a standard hard round, and you might want to just sort of break up that pattern a bit. Down, I don't know, not like that. Maybe there, like that, just so it doesn't look like you can see a tiling repeating pattern. Now, you've got to do that. It's going to get more and more difficult the further back in the image you get, because the further back in the image you get, the more stuff you're going to have to fill in. But it's generally a case of making a selection close to where you need to extend the building, and then sort of copying it and moving it down, and then tidying it up by getting rid of the obvious repeating kind of patterns. And that's kind of the gist. And then you go through and obviously you cut out each building, put it into a new texture with an alpha channel and save that out, and then bring it into Maya, and don't do like I did and accidentally forget to actually apply the texture. So you've got to set up your projection and then apply the texture. When it comes to doing the actual animation, remember, you shouldn't animate the camera. If you move this camera, the projection is going to swim through and it's all going to look wrong. So you have to create a new camera. So what you could do, you want a camera obviously that's pretty close to the projection camera. You could just duplicate that camera and double click this and rename this one, I don't know, animation camera, something like that. And if we look through animation camera, it looks identical, but now we can set some keyframes on the camera. So you can do something like that. Let's make sure we're changing to object. So you can set some keyframes here. So you can do that however you like. Down here, select all of these and key selected. Move along a little bit, and then you can see it moving a little bit. Let's move this a bit more. Move forwards like this. I don't know, maybe you want to put a slight kind of tilt like this as well. And key selected again. If I can actually do a proper animation. Oh yeah, it is. It's just not updating as I scrub it through. Yeah. So there we go. And that's the camera you want to render. When it comes to rendering, I don't know how much rendering you've done. Have you done any rendering yet in production skills or anything, or with Paul on Intro to CGI, like rendering animated sequences? If you haven't, I'll show you. You want to go up to here, display render settings. The important thing here is actually rendering out the proper camera. So you've got renderable cameras. So you've got a choice here. You want to render out animation camera. And for now, do 2000 by 1000 so it matches your actual painting. And then click on maintain width and height. Because then if you want to do a smaller, lower res render, you can do something like that, and it will automatically adjust the correct settings. So you do that, and then you want to go to rendering, render sequence, and then that will render out that camera's animation and save a frame each time, and it will save it out into the images folder of your project. Okay, I think that's information overload for now, so I'm going to pause the recording.